Michael Richardson was a man who noticed everything. At 38 years old, he had built himself into one of Boston's most successful real estate developers. His empire stretched across the city like a spider's web, luxury condominiums, renovated brownstones, gleaming office towers that reflected the clouds. He could spot a bad investment from a mile away, catch a decimal point error in a 100-page contract, remember the exact profit margin from a deal closed 3 years prior. But somehow, he had never truly seen the woman who had raised him. Her name was Margaret Louise Chen. She had been part of his family's household since Michael was 18 months old, brought in by his parents when his mother's career as a surgeon demanded more hours than a day could hold. Margaret had been young then, barely 23, fresh from Taiwan with a degree in education that America didn't recognize and a heart bigger than the ocean she'd crossed. Michael's earliest memories were painted with Margaret's presence. The smell of ginger and sesame oil wafting from the kitchen, soft hands braiding his sister's hair before school, a gentle voice reading bedtime stories in accented English, sometimes slipping into Mandarin when she thought the children were already asleep. Margaret had been the constant in a household of variables, parents who traveled for work, nannies who came and went, tutors hired and fired based on test scores. When Michael was 9, his father died suddenly, a heart attack in a hotel room halfway around the world. His mother, already drowning in grief, pulled away from her children, burying herself in longer shifts at the hospital. Michael's sister, Sarah, was only 6. They clung to each other at the funeral, small and lost in clothes that didn't quite fit right. It was Margaret who held them through those dark months. Margaret who sat on the edge of Michael's bed when the nightmares came, when he woke up crying because he couldn't remember his father's voice anymore. Margaret who made Sarah's favorite dumplings every Sunday, the only meal that could coax a smile from the little girl's face. Margaret who somehow kept their world from completely falling apart. But Michael had never asked about her life, never wondered if she was lonely in her small room at the end of the hall, never thought to inquire about her dreams, her losses, her story. Until the bags. It started on a Tuesday evening in late October. Michael had been working from his penthouse office, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. At 7:30, he stepped out onto his balcony for air and happened to glance down at street level. There, exiting through the building's service entrance, was Margaret. She was wearing her coat, the same navy blue one she'd had for years, and carrying 2 large canvas bags. They looked heavy. She walked with a slight lean to compensate for the weight. Michael frowned. Margaret never brought bags with her to work. She arrived each morning at 8 with nothing but her small purse and left each evening at 6. This was different. He watched her disappear down the street toward the T station and thought nothing more of it. But then it happened again on Thursday. Same time, same bags, same purposeful stride toward the subway. And again on Monday. By the third occurrence, Michael's mind began working the way it always did with inconsistencies, calculating, analyzing, suspecting. What was in those bags? Where was she going? His penthouse was equipped with state-of-the-art security, every valuable item cataloged and tracked. He did a mental inventory, artwork, electronics, the wine collection, his mother's jewelry that he kept in the safe. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the bags kept appearing. Michael tried to shake off the unease. This was Margaret, the woman who had sacrificed years of her life for his family, but the doubt once planted grew roots. He began watching more carefully, noting patterns. Tuesday and Thursday nights like clockwork, occasionally a Monday or Wednesday. The bags were always full when she left, her shoulders bent under their weight. What was she hiding? The question gnawed at him through meetings and conference calls. He found himself distracted, staring at spreadsheets without seeing the numbers. His business partner, David, noticed. "You all right, Mike? You've been off all week." "I'm fine," Michael had said, just thinking about something. But he wasn't fine. The suspicion had wrapped itself around his thoughts like ivy, choking out everything else. He felt foolish for doubting her, but he couldn't stop. The bags appeared in his mind's eye at random moments, during negotiations, in the shower, while trying to fall asleep. Finally, on a cold Thursday in November, Michael made a decision. He would follow her just once, just to put his mind at ease. He left work early, telling his assistant he was feeling unwell. He drove to his building and parked down E block where he could see the service entrance. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pavement. The temperature had dropped below freezing and his breath formed clouds in the car. At 7:30 exactly, Margaret emerged. Navy coat, canvas bags pulling at her shoulders. She walked past his car without seeing him. She had no reason to look and headed toward Park Street Station. Michael waited until she disappeared down the subway steps, then followed at a distance. The Red Line train was crowded with evening commuters. Michael stood 3 cars behind Margaret, watching through the connecting windows as the train rattled southbound. They passed through South Station, Broadway, Andrew Square. The crowd thinned with each stop. Margaret got off at Fields Corner, deep in Dorchester. This was a neighborhood Michael knew only from development reports and census data. His company had considered buying properties here 5 years ago but decided the area was too risky for investment. Translation: too poor, too working class, not profitable enough. Michael kept his distance as Margaret climbed the station stairs and walked east. The streets here were different from downtown. Older triple-deckers lined both sides, their paint peeling in places. Corner stores with hand-painted signs. A small park where teenagers huddled around a basketball court despite the cold. Margaret turned down a side street and approached a community center, a low brick building that had seen better decades. Faded murals covered one wall, children holding hands, a rising sun, words in both English and Spanish. Juntos somos fuertes, together we are strong. She pushed through a side door that led to the basement. A hand-lettered sign read, Hope Kitchen, all welcome, 6-9 p.m. Michael waited outside, his heart pounding. After a few minutes, he descended the concrete steps and eased the door open. The basement was warm, bright with fluorescent lights and full of people. 20, maybe 30 individuals sat at long folding tables, elderly men and women, young mothers with children, teenagers who looked like they'd aged too quickly. And there in the small kitchen area against the far wall was Margaret. But she looked different than Michael had ever seen her. Her hair was down, falling to her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual neat bun. She wore an old cardigan, soft and worn from years of washing. And she was smiling, truly smiling, in a way that transformed her entire face. Margaret stood at a large pot on the stove, stirring something that filled the air with savory warmth. As people approached with their bowls, she served them generous portions, speaking to each person by name. Carlos Mijo, how is your mother feeling? Better, Miss Margaret, the medicine you helped us get is working. Good, good, make sure she rests, and take extra soup for her, okay? Miss Margaret, you got any of those vegetable dumplings? A young man, probably early 20s, thin and hollow-eyed in a way that spoke of harder times. For you, Jerome, always, I made them fresh this afternoon. Margaret handed him a container wrapped in foil, and there's rice pudding for dessert tonight. A little girl, no more than 6, tugged at Margaret's sleeve. She had dirt on her face and shoes that were 2 sizes too small. Where does all the food come from? Margaret knelt down, eye level with the child, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I make it with love, sweetheart, with love and hope that you'll grow up strong and kind. Like you. Margaret's smile wavered for just a moment, and Michael saw her eyes glisten. Better than me, baby, so much better. Michael stood frozen in the doorway, his breath caught somewhere between his lungs and his throat. Those bags, the ones he'd suspected carried stolen goods, they had been filled with food. Food that Margaret had bought with her own money, cooked in her own time, and brought here to feed people who had nothing. People his company had helped push out of their homes. The realization hit him like a physical blow. 3 years ago, Michael's development company had purchased 4 buildings in this neighborhood. They'd renovated them into luxury apartments, tripling the rent. The previous tenants, families who'd lived there for decades, couldn't afford the new leases. They'd been offered small buyouts, barely enough for a security deposit elsewhere. Michael had signed off on the project without a second thought, just business, just numbers on a spreadsheet. But these were the people, the faces behind those numbers, the families his decisions had displaced. And Margaret, who worked for him, who accepted her modest paycheck from him, had been using her own money to help them survive the consequences of his choices. Michael felt his legs go weak. He grabbed the doorframe for support. A voice spoke beside him. You going to stand there blocking the door, or you going to come in? Michael turned, a man stood. Odd there, probably in his 40s, wearing a worn military jacket with patches sewn unevenly across the chest. His eyes were sharp, assessing. I'm sorry, Michael stepped aside. The man didn't move. You look familiar. I don't think we've met. No, I've seen your face, newspaper maybe, or, his eyes narrowed, you're Richardson, the developer. Michael's throat went dry, yes. The man studied him for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression, not quite anger, not quite resignation. She doesn't know you're here, does she? No. You following Miss Margaret? The directness of the question left no room for deflection. Yes, I saw her leaving with bags and I thought. Michael couldn't finish the sentence. How could he admit what he'd thought? How pathetic and small it sounded now. You thought she was stealing from you, it wasn't a question. I didn't know. No, you didn't because you never asked. The man's voice was quiet but sharp. You know what Miss Margaret does? She works all day for you, goes home, cooks all evening, then brings that food here. Been doing it for 6 years, every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes more, uses her own paycheck, her own time, doesn't ask for help, doesn't ask for credit, just feeds people because somebody has to. Each word landed like a stone in Michael's chest. She could have asked you for help, the man continued. Your company's got more money than God, but she didn't because she knows how people like you see people like us. We're problems, not people, obstacles to profit. That's not. Yes, it is. The man's voice didn't rise, but it cut clean through. 3 years ago, your company bought my building, lived there 17 years. You offered me 15,000 to leave. Know how long that lasted? 4 months. 4 months before I was on the street. Michael felt sick. I'm sorry. You sorry, or you just feel bad now that you got a face to attach to the paperwork? The question hung in the cold basement air. Michael had no answer because the truth was too ugly to speak aloud. The man shook his head and walked past him toward the food line. She's a saint, that woman. More grace in her little finger than most people got in their whole body. You should be thanking God every day that someone like her puts up with someone like you. Michael stood alone in the doorway, watching Margaret serve soup, watching her smile, watching her pour herself into people who had nothing to offer her in return except gratitude and recognition of her humanity. And he realized with crushing clarity that after 36 years of knowing Margaret Chen, he didn't know her at all. Michael didn't approach Margaret that night. He couldn't. Instead, he climbed back up those concrete steps, walked to the train station, and rode home in numb silence. The luxury of his penthouse, the marble counters, the custom furniture, the artwork he'd purchased because someone told him it would appreciate in value, it all felt hollow now, performative, empty symbols of a success that meant nothing. He stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the glittering skyline. Somewhere down there was Margaret, still serving soup, still offering grace to people he'd helped forget. Michael didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at nothing, feeling the weight of 36 years of blindness pressing down on him. When morning came, Margaret arrived at 8 o'clock as she always did. Michael heard her key in the lock, her soft footsteps in the entryway. He walked out to meet her. She was hanging up her coat, her movements practiced and efficient. When she saw him, she paused. "Mr. Richardson, you're home early. Are you feeling well?" Margaret, his voice came out hoarse. "Would you like breakfast? I can make. I need to tell you something." She stopped, her hand still on the coat closet door. Something in his tone must have registered because her expression shifted, became guarded. "I followed you last night." The words fell into the space between them like stones into still water. Margaret's face went very still, very careful. She slowly closed the closet door and turned to face him fully. "To the community center, I saw what you were doing." Margaret said nothing. She just watched him with those dark eyes that had seen him at his best and worst, that had witnessed every stage of his life and yet had remained fundamentally unknown to him. "Those bags," Michael continued, his throat tight. "I thought you were taking something from me. I thought," he couldn't finish. "You thought I was stealing," her voice was quiet, factual. "Oh yes." Margaret nodded slowly as if confirming something she'd already known. "I see." "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Margaret, I didn't." "Didn't what?" She cut him off gently. "Didn't know, didn't think to ask, didn't trust me after 36 years. Each question was a knife, precise and unavoidable." "All of it," Michael whispered, hollow. "F the above." They stood in the entryway of his penthouse, and for the first time in their relationship, the silence between them wasn't comfortable. It was heavy with things unsaid, years of assumptions and distances that had calcified into permanence. "Why didn't you tell me," Michael asked, "about the community center, about what you were doing?" Margaret looked at him for a long moment. "What would you have done, Mr. Richardson?" "I would have helped, given you money, resources." "Made it about you," she finished softly. "Turned my kitchen into your charity project, put your company's name on it, used it for good publicity while your other projects kept pushing people out of their homes." The accuracy of her words made him flinch, because yes, that's exactly what he would have done. "I didn't want your help," Margaret continued. "I wanted them to stay human, to be people I served because I cared, not recipients of some developer's tax-deductible generosity." "Margaret, do you know why I started going there, Mr. Richardson?" Her voice remained steady, but something raw had entered it. "6 years ago, right after my son died." Michael felt the floor tilt beneath him. You have a son." Had, the word was final, absolute. "Daniel, he was 29, diabetes, couldn't afford his insulin after your healthcare company, the one you invested in, raised the prices. He rationed his doses, and then one day his body just gave up." Michael couldn't breathe. He remembered that investment. 5 years ago, a pharmaceutical company making insulin, the returns had been excellent. "I took a week off work," Margaret said, her voice distant now, remembering. "You asked if I was feeling ill, I said yes. You told me to feel better and went to your meeting. You never asked me why, never followed up. And I realized something that week, sitting in my empty apartment planning my son's funeral." She looked directly at him. "I realized you didn't see me, not really. I was furniture to you, useful, reliable furniture, but not human, not someone with a son, not someone with grief." Tears were streaming down Michael's face now, but Margaret's eyes remained dry, as if she'd cried all her tears years ago. So I started going to the center, she continued. Started cooking, serving, sitting with people who society had decided didn't matter, because they reminded me that I wasn't invisible, that my pain was real, that Daniel's life meant something even if you never knew he existed. Michael wanted to sink through the floor. I sent flowers to the funeral. I remember sending flowers. Yes, a standard arrangement. Your assistant ordered it. The card said deepest sympathies, the Richardson family. You didn't sign it yourself. He hadn't. He'd been in meetings all that day, had barely registered that Margaret had a family member who died. It was just another item on his assistant's to-do list. Send funeral flowers for Margaret's relative. I don't know what to say, Michael whispered. There's nothing to say, Mr. Richardson. The past is past. I made my peace with who you are a long time ago. Who I am. Someone who sees people as numbers, employees, tenants, investments, not as humans with stories and pain and dreams. She picked up her bag. I should start your breakfast. Margaret, wait. She turned back. I want to change. The words came out raw, desperate. I don't want to be that person anymore. Margaret studied him, and for a moment he saw something flicker in her expression. Not hope exactly, but perhaps a willingness to believe. Then change, she said simply, not for me, not to ease your guilt, but because it's right. She walked past him toward the kitchen, and Michael stood alone in his entryway, feeling like a stranger in his own life. Michael couldn't go back to business as usual. The scales had fallen from his eyes, and now everywhere he looked, he saw what he'd been missing. He started spending less time at his office and more time researching the projects his company had completed, not just the profit margins and completion dates, but the human impact. He pulled displacement records, read complaints filed by former tenants, followed up on buyout recipients to see where they'd ended up. The picture that emerged was devastating. Over the past decade, Richardson Development had acquired 37 properties across Boston. They displaced over 1,500 families. The company offered buyouts that averaged $12,000 per family, barely enough for first and last month's rent, and a security deposit in the expensive rental market his company had helped create. Michael read case after case. An elderly couple who'd lived in the same apartment for 40 years forced out when Richardson Development bought their building. The buyout money ran out in 5 months. They ended up in separate nursing homes because they couldn't afford a place together. The husband died 6 months later. The wife's daughter sent a letter to the company saying her father died of a broken heart, not old age. A single father with 3 kids working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Richardson Development displaced him, and the only place he could afford with the buyout was an hour outside the city. He lost both jobs because of the commute time. Last known address, homeless shelter in Dorchester. Michael found himself at his computer at 2 in the morning, reading these stories with tears streaming down his face. Real people, real lives destroyed by decisions he'd made without a second thought. He thought about the man at the community center, the one who'd called him out. 17 years in one place, reduced to 4 months of security before ending up on the street. How many others were there? How many people were sleeping in shelters or their cars or on couches of friends who couldn't really afford to help them, all because Michael Richardson decided their neighborhood had development potential. On the 4th day of his research binge, Margaret found him asleep at his desk, surrounded by printouts and open files. She set down a cup of coffee gently, and the sound woke him. What are you doing, Mr. Richardson? Her voice was soft, concerned. Michael looked up at her with bloodshot eyes, learning who I really am. Margaret glanced at the papers spread across his desk. She picked one up, a displacement record from a project 3 years ago, read it quietly, set it back down. This is the family from Dorchester, she said. The Johnsons, I know them. Marie Johnson comes to the center with her 3 children. She works overnight shifts at 2 different hospitals now because she had to move so far out. I did that to her. Oh yes. The simple acknowledgement without sugarcoating or comfort was somehow worse than any accusation. I have to fix this, Michael said. I don't know how, but I have to. Margaret sat down in the chair across from his desk. You can't undo the past, Mr. Richardson. Those years are gone, those homes are gone, the sense of community, the connections, the stability, you can't give that back. Then what do I do? You stop doing harm and you start building differently. Michael looked at her, really looked at her, the gray in her hair that he'd never noticed appearing, the lines around her eyes from smiling at other people's children, the tiredness she carried that came from serving everyone except herself. Will you help me, he asked. Help you what? Rebuild, redesign how my company operates, make sure we never displace another family without giving them real options, real support, real dignity. He leaned forward. Margaret, you see what I've been blind to? You know these communities, these people, I need you. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. Why should I trust this isn't just guilt talking? Guilt fades, Mr. Richardson, then what? You go back to business as usual. Then hold me accountable, be part of the company, not as my housekeeper, as my partner, director of community relations. Full salary, benefits, decision-making power, help me build something that doesn't destroy people's lives. I'm 62 years old, Margaret said. I'm tired, I've worked my whole life for other people, why would I want to take on more responsibility? Because you care, Michael said simply. Because you've been doing this work for free for 6 years. Because you see people I don't see. And because maybe, just maybe, we could actually help families instead of harming them. Margaret studied his face, looking for something. Sincerity maybe, or staying power, the ability to see this through when it got hard. I'll think about it, she said finally. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. Michael didn't wait for Margaret's answer to start making changes. He called an emergency board meeting for the following week. His business partners and investors gathered in the conference room, expensive suits and skeptical expressions. Michael stood at the head of the table, and for the first time in his career, he felt nervous addressing them. I've been reviewing our displacement practices, he began, and I'm proposing we fundamentally restructure how we develop properties. His CFO, Richard, leaned back in his chair. Michael, we've been over this, our model works, we're profitable, growing. At whose expense? Michael cut him off. The room went quiet. Over the past decade, we've displaced 1,500 families. We offer them buyouts that barely cover 3 months of rent. Then we wonder why Boston has a housing crisis, why homelessness is up 40%, why working families can't afford to live in the city anymore. That's not our responsibility, another board member said. We're not a charity, we're a business. We're both, Michael insisted. We operate in communities, we benefit from those communities, and when we destroy them for profit, we're responsible for the consequences. Richard shook his head, Mike. Hale, what's gotten into you? This is capitalism, this is how development works. Then maybe we need to develop differently. Michael clicked to the first slide of his presentation, but instead of profit projections, the screen showed a photograph, an elderly woman sitting on the steps of a building with an eviction notice in her hands. This is Helen Kowalski, 74 years old, lived in her apartment in Dorchester for 38 years. We bought her building 2 years ago, offered her $14,000 to leave. That money ran out in 4 months. She's now living with her daughter's family in a 2-bedroom apartment in Revere, 3 generations in 900 square feet. Michael clicked to the next slide, a young family with 2 small children. The Martinez family. We displaced them 18 months ago. They had to move to Brockton. Both parents now spend 3 hours a day commuting. Their kids had to switch schools. Their support system, grandparents, cousins, church community, all gone. He clicked through slide after slide, faces, names, stories, the human cost of his success. I'm not proposing we stop developing, Michael said. I'm proposing we develop with people, not on top of them. Mixed income housing, community ownership models, real relocation support, partnerships with families instead of displacement. This will destroy our profit margins, Richard said flatly. No, it will reduce them, will still be profitable, just not obscenely profitable. Investors won't accept this. Then we find new investors. The room erupted, board members talking over each other, some angry, some confused, all clearly thinking Michael had lost his mind. He let them argue, then he raised his hand and gradually the room quieted. I know this is radical, Michael said. I know it goes against everything we've built, but I'm asking you to trust me one more time, not because it's profitable, but because it's right, because we can't keep building our success on other people's suffering. Long silence. Finally, Eleanor Chen, the oldest member of the board, spoke up. She'd been with the company since Michael's father founded it 30 years ago. Your father started this company with a different vision, she said quietly. He wanted to build homes people could actually afford, communities where families could thrive. Somewhere along the way we lost that. Maybe it's time we remembered. Eleanor, be realistic, Richard started. I am being realistic, she cut him off. Real estate development built on displacement isn't sustainable. Eventually, there's no one left to displace, nowhere left to build. But if we build with communities, we create lasting partnerships, lasting value. She looked at Michael. I'll support this proposal. One by one, other board members started nodding, not all of them. Richard and 2 others stood up and walked out, but 5 remained. It was enough. The restructuring took months. Michael brought in community organizers, nonprofit leaders, and former tenants to help redesign how Richardson Development operated, and he kept asking Margaret, Every week he'd bring it up. I need your help. These communities trust you in a way they'll never trust me, please. Finally, on a Tuesday evening in March, Margaret said yes. She didn't quit being his housekeeper entirely. She insisted on keeping those duties part-time because she said she'd go crazy sitting in meetings all day. But 3 days a week, Margaret Chen became the director of community relations for Richardson Development, with an office on the same floor as Michael's and a salary that finally reflected her worth. The first project under the new model was called Dorchester Commons. It would be built on land Richardson Development already owned, land they'd been planning to turn into luxury condos. Instead, they designed it as mixed-income housing. 40% of units affordable for families making 30 to 50% of the area median income. 30% workforce housing for teachers, nurses, service workers. 30% market rate to ensure the project remained financially viable. But more than that, they involved the community from day one. Margaret organized meetings where residents could voice their needs, their concerns, their hopes. Michael sat in those meetings and listened, really listened, for the first time in his career. An elderly man raised his hand. Michael recognized him immediately. It was the man from the community center, the one who'd called him out that first night. "I'm Robert Chen," the man said. He glanced at Margaret. "No relation, though I wish I was." Gentle laughter rippled through the room. "I was displaced by one of your previous projects, Mr. Richardson, lost my home of 17 years. So why should I trust this is any different?" Michael stood up. "Because you're going to help build it, Mr. Chen. I'm offering you a position as Community Advisory Director, paid position, full benefits. Your job will be to make sure we don't repeat the mistakes I made before, to hold us accountable to the community." Robert stared at him. "You're serious?" "Completely serious. You know this neighborhood, you know what families need. I don't, but you do." After a long pause, Robert nodded slowly. "All right, I'll do it, but I'm going to be a pain in your ass about it." "Good," Michael said. "That's exactly what I need." Over the following months, the project took shape. Not quickly, the old model had been faster because it didn't involve community input, but this was better. They hired locally for construction jobs, providing training for young people who'd never had opportunities before. They partnered with small businesses in the neighborhood to supply materials. They created a community center as part of the development, with free programs designed by residents. And they reached out to every family Richardson Development had displaced from the area, offering them first right to return. Not as tenants, but as partial owners through a community land trust model. Marie Johnson, the single mother who'd been forced to move an hour outside the city, was one of the first to sign up. "You're giving us a chance to come home," she said to Michael with tears in her eyes. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to afford this neighborhood again." "You shouldn't have had to leave in the first place," Michael said. "I can't undo that, but I can make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else." The project wasn't perfect. There were delays, budget overruns, disagreements about design. Robert Chen did indeed prove to be a pain in Michael's ass, questioning every decision, pushing back on anything that seemed to prioritize profit over people. But that was exactly what Michael needed. 8 months into the Dorchester Commons project, Michael got a call that made his blood run cold. "Mr. Richardson, this is Dr. Patel from Massachusetts General. I'm calling about Margaret Chen." Michael's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "She collapsed during a community meeting this afternoon. We've admitted her for observation." Michael was out the door before the doctor finished explaining. He found Margaret in a hospital room on the cardiac floor, looking small and tired in the hospital bed, an IV line running into her arm. "Margaret," he sank into the chair beside her. She opened her eyes. "Mr. Richardson, you didn't need to come." "Of course I did," his voice cracked. "What happened?" Dr. Patel entered the room, a kind-faced woman in her 40s. "Mr. Richardson, I'm glad you're here. Margaret has given me permission to discuss her condition with you." Michael nodded, gripping the armrests of his chair. "Margaret has advanced type 2 diabetes that's been poorly controlled for years. Her blood pressure is dangerously high, she's showing signs of early kidney disease, and she's severely anemic." The medical terms hit Michael like punches, but she's going to be okay. "With proper management, yes, but Mr. Richardson, these conditions don't develop overnight. When's the last time Margaret saw a doctor?" Michael looked at Margaret. She wouldn't meet his eyes. "I asked Margaret the same question," Dr. Patel continued. "She told me it's been over 5 years." 5 years, Michael's voice rose. "Margaret, why?" "Because healthcare is expensive," Margaret said quietly, "and I had other priorities." What priorities could possibly? Michael stopped. He knew the answer. The community center, the people she fed every week. She'd been spending her money on them instead of on herself. Dr. Patel glanced between them. Margaret mentioned she recently got better health insurance. That's good, but we have a lot of catching up to do. She'll need to stay here for a few days while we stabilize her condition. Then she'll need ongoing specialist care, medications, lifestyle changes. After the doctor left, Michael pulled his chair closer to Margaret's bed. Why didn't you tell me you were sick? I wasn't sick, just tired. Margaret. She sighed because I knew what you'd do. You'd try to fix it, throw money at it, make it about your guilt instead of about what I needed. What do you need? I need to keep doing my work. I need to see this project through. I need to keep serving at the center. Her voice grew fierce despite her weakness. I need to not be treated like I'm fragile. Michael felt tears burning his eyes. You almost died today. We're all dying, Mr. Richardson. The only question is what we do with the time we have. He took her hand gently. Her fingers were thin, the skin papery. How had he never noticed how fragile she'd become? When I was a boy, Michael said softly, and my father died, you sat with me every night, do you remember? Margaret nodded. I used to have this nightmare. I'd dream I was drowning and no one could see me. I'd scream and scream, but no one heard, and then you'd wake me up.